Oh,
It
now
says
stream.
preparing.
Okay.
You know, it took a hot minute last time. Mine says live on the screen that I'm seeing.
And we're live.
Mine didn't.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening to the entire internet, as always. You know, every time we do these, I say hello to the entire internet because you never know who's watching, and it tickles me every time. Tonight is our third of 4 public meetings to go over the City of South Fulton zoning rewrite. We're here soliciting additional public information near the finish line of our project. We are barreling towards the finish line, but looking to get one last opportunity for everyone to give input in the process. Go ahead and next slide, please. Before we get to the agenda and get to the meat of the presentation, I want to tell everyone how comments will be taken tonight and how they'll be addressed during the presentation. We will pause periodically throughout the presentation to check to see which comments have come in, answer any questions. And the past 2 times we've done this, some interesting and productive dialogue has developed over the meetings that we're able to take comments. And so I'm hopeful that will happen again this evening. Please comment at any point you want. As soon as that thought comes to your brain, please send us a note. As soon as that question comes to your mind, please ask us that question and we'll get to it as soon as we can. You could submit a comments in the YouTube chat below the box that you're watching right now, which is being monitored, or email us at any time at planning@cityofsouthfultonga.gov. That's our regular planning email address, and that is being monitored as well. Next slide, please. For your review, the zoning ordinance that we will be talking about tonight is posted on our website. It's the complete document. It's, I believe, 322 pages. There for your reading pleasure. We look forward to any specific comments you may have as well. If you are reading over it and you have a comment that strikes you tomorrow or Wednesday morning, any time, let us know any specific questions. We'll be happy to get back to you on those. There's also a new survey posted at our website for you to complete. This is the second round of this survey. If you completed the survey the first time, please come and do it again. There's a new set of questions that we put a lot of thought and effort into and look forward to getting your responses. If you have not completed the survey yet, please go take it now for the first time. Your input is very valued in this process. And that link at the bottom of the page is the link to the city's zoning rewrite page. If you go to the regular City of South Fulton website and go to the zoning submenu, you'll see the link to this page pop up, and I promise it is not as complicated to get to as I made it just sound. Next slide, please. Again, we strongly encourage everyone to read our ordinance. Any resident, any business owner, developer, any interested party at all. You could also submit comments to the consultants who are helping us on this process at any time you'd like at the email address that is on your screen. As I said, this is the third of 4 presentations that we're going to be doing. We're doing the same presentation at the same time on Wednesday evening. And then on Thursday morning, the survey will be taken down and the answers there will be submitted to our consultants. We will also be consolidating all the comments that we get on Thursday morning to go to our consultants as well. So as I said, we are getting close to the finish line, but there's still plenty of time for you to get those comments in, and we look forward to all of those. Move forward, please. Brief agenda for us tonight. I'm going to do my best to not read the slides verbatim that are being presented because I know everybody who's watching can read as well. I'm going to talk about the goals of the zoning rewrite, the process that we've undertaken so far, go over the key recommendations and suggestions that have been made by the consultants and staff, and then the next steps in this process. Move on. Let's talk about the overall goals of going through a process such as the one that we are undertaking right now. Now, the City of South Fulton zoning codes, the existing codes, have been with the city before it was incorporated. So a lot of our codes date back decades and decades to regular Fulton County ordinances. So it was past time for a rewrite. We were also hoping to kind of further our city's individuality and identity in this process and update the codes to be more reflective of who we are right now and who we want to be in the future. So we're talking about customizing the zoning ordinance, like I just said, to meet our specific needs and specific goals. Update it in a general sense to any federal laws and state laws to be in compliance, those are changing constantly. So wanting to and needing to update those is a critical component of this task and a critical thing that we do on a regular basis. If you are familiar at all with our current zoning ordinance, you know that it is challenging, to say the least, to use. And one of the big things that we're doing with this ordinance is cutting down on the number of articles. As you'll see later, it's gone from 34 to 10, and ensuring that each section has a table of contents so you can get to the information that you need very quickly. Later on in the presentation, we'll go through some of the tables and charts, and we'll show how this process has helped create a more user-friendly document, and then also coordinate our zoning with other planning documents and procedures that we have in place right now. Move on, please. So we're talking about the analysis. What have we done internally and with our consultant to determine what needs to be done? So again, we want to make sure that we, excuse me, I have some dust on my screen here that I'm looking at in my home. Want to update any outdated codes, and we'll go through some examples of this, but a lot of times our codes feature architectural requirements that are outdated, building requirements that are outdated. You know, as the economy changes, as the world changes, we want to make sure that our codes are up to date enough to help us move forward the way that we need to. A lot of the things that you'll see that we'll talk about specifically have to deal with definitions and uses in particular. A lot of uses that are in old use charts in zoning codes are out of date. You don't have a lot of blacksmiths anymore and a lot of candle makers anymore. So we want to make sure that uses like that are not prevalent, and we want to make sure that uses that are not environmentally conscious, shall we say, or environmentally adverse uses are put in places that are appropriate in the city or banned overall. A lot of times in zoning codes, you'll see long lists of definitions. And so we want to make sure that the definitions that we have in our zoning are comprehensive as well. We're going to talk a little bit about the zoning districts themselves and overlay districts. The city of South Fulton has very specific and very detailed overlays, and wanted to make sure that their integrity was preserved and they were modernized to be used more effectively by developers and builders. We updated our processes and procedures because we want to make sure that the habits that we have as staff are as helpful as can be to anyone coming into our office and as beneficial to anyone wanting to do work in the city of South Fulton. And then again, to just coordinate our documents and our processes throughout the organization. And we don't want to have conflicting regulations in the document, and we don't want to have processes that are confusing. Next slide, please. So in an overall sense, we really wanted to go through the hundreds of pages and modernize the code. As I said, these are one of those statements that I don't want to just read verbatim here, but wanted to go through all of the aspects of our code in detail to update it as well. So because we know that there is a lot of community input and a lot of habits and a lot of processes that are based on our code and dependent on our code, and a lot of people that like a lot of aspects of our code, one of the main goals we wanted to achieve was to improve the formatting of the code and to make sure that the document that we had was easier for people to use. And coming from a staff perspective, we are well on our way to doing that. And anyone who has gone in and seen the new code, you will recognize the organization of the new code, and all the changes that we've made have made it much easier to understand and easier to use. And again, we encourage everyone to go to our website, download the existing code. It's a PDF you can read, and compare that to the new code, also as a PDF to read and see the work that we've done so far. Go to the next slide, please. The point of this slide here is that we wanted to show everyone that we were not doing this in a silo, that it wasn't just one person or one group sitting in a room, going over the legislation, going over the regulations, going through this document and making decisions single-handedly. We got input from all throughout the organization. And as you'll see in a slide or two, all throughout the community as well. But it wasn't just planning going through it. It was zoning, fire, business license, engineering, permitting, code enforcement. Many different areas of our city are affected by this document, and we wanted to make sure that all of those areas had a voice. And because a lot of those groups or a lot of those departments are public facing, it was important for everyone to know that their points of view are being taken into consideration. Next slide, please. We'll talk briefly about the zoning map a little bit later on in this process, but one of the things that it was important for us to do was make a map that was more user-friendly and that was clear and understandable. We had zoning districts that were not used, and so there was no reason to keep those on our map and in our options, and zoning areas that were outdated. And so we wanted to make sure that those were updated and removed if necessary. And again, just wanted to state that it was important that all these changes make sure that we're always in compliance with state and federal guidelines. Next slide, please. So to date, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of public comments have been taken. We are very near the finish line. The intent is for public comment to finish up this week, to get an updated draft of the ordinance next week, and for the ordinance to be adopted by the end of October by council after feedback and a first and second reading. Several meetings have been held with council, and we've had meetings from each district's representative, which is all of your council members individually. Go to the next slide, please. I'm going to read this off because, I'm sorry, there you go. I'm going to read this off because I think it's important for everyone to understand how much work we have done reaching out to the public. 2 planning commission meetings, 4 public workshops, 9 town halls, 10 other community meetings. And as I said, this is 3 of 4 public meetings that we're having right now at the end of the process. Go to the next slide, please. I wanted to have this slide here because it was important for everyone who's watching, especially for our residents, to understand that this is not a one-time process for us. Getting public input is something that we do all throughout the year in many different ways. And I wanted to have this slide up so that I could show people how many different things we've been doing over the past year that we have needed public input for. So right now we have the zoning rewrite, and that'll be finished at the end of next month. We will soon be starting a comprehensive planning process that will be that will have a very, very heavy public involvement component, and that's going to start in October and finish a year from now in 2021. Public Works has been doing a transportation plan that is with council right now for adoption. There's a park and recreation plan that's under development as we speak. Code enforcement interacts with public on a daily basis getting feedback. And code enforcement, or I'm sorry, the economic development plan is also with council right now for adoption. So there's been a lot of planning activities, whether it's with zoning, with transportation and public works, with economic development, that has been going on, getting public input throughout the past 12 months. And so it's something that we take very seriously and find a lot of value with. I'm going to pause really quickly right here to see if there's any questions or comments that have come in yet. Anything on the YouTube chat or anything on the...
No, we don't have anything yet.
Okay, fair enough.
Great.
So we can move on. Next slide, please. So when you go to the website and you download that document and you want to have some fun reading all 322 pages of it, what are you going to see? You're going to see a very clear table of contents, which each of the 10 articles represented. As you go into each of those articles, they will have their own table of contents. So all the content is easily organized. If you're familiar with our current zones, you have to go into the PDF and search by a word, and that word may have 100 results that you have to flip through, or you have to search for the exact line of the document only if you know the line. So having this table of contents is going to make it much more user-friendly for staff, for petitioners, and for any member of the public who needs to know the zoning. We've reduced the number of articles from 34 to 10. I mentioned that before, and I'm stating it again because it's really important, and I think it shows a real commitment to being more customer friendly. Next slide, please. We'll go through each of these aspects in detail in terms of the recommendations that have been made by our consultants and put into place in our new zoning. A lot of the time tonight is going to be spent going through the uses, because those are the areas that we get by far the most questions about, whether it's on a daily basis. We've gotten a lot of interesting and useful comments on our use tables through these presentations, the first 2, and so I anticipate some more coming tonight. So we're going to go through those in detail, talk about commercial uses, industrial uses, and then as I said, go over those tables. We've also made a point to create tables of disallowed uses. A lot of those are environmentally adverse. We get a lot of comments on things like recycling, manufacturing in a general sense, trash, refuge and incineration, things like that, heavy industrial uses. So it's important for us to show that a lot of thought and consideration has gone into getting those uses out of the city as best we can, as far as not allowing new ones to come in. We'll talk a little bit about the zoning districts and some of the recommendations that have been made there. We'll talk a little bit in detail about the overlays as well, because again, I want to stress their importance and significance in our city, and overall for development standards as well. Go to the next slide. One of the things that was most important was having a list of allowed uses. If you are familiar with our current zoning, you'll know that the uses are listed multiple times in each of the zoning codes, and you have to go and find them individually for each zoning code. So creating tables, which we'll go through, showing those uses, helps create a document that is easier for everyone to use, and also has allowed us the opportunity to have a dialogue with the community as to what they really want to see in certain places. One of the main points that we'll talk about is having a differentiation between neighborhood and general commercial. And the examples that we'll see in a slide or two have to deal with things like restaurants that are walkable versus automobile repair shops. And that's a really good example to use, because some commercial uses you may want to have near your home that are walkable, that are community-based, that could be gathering places. But some commercial uses might be a little bit more intensive or busy, and they're still very valuable and necessary uses for a community to have, but you may not necessarily want them as close to where you live. And there may have been some confusion in the past between our commercial areas as to what can go where and which is the most appropriate place for certain businesses to go. And it's important that we stress that a lot of thought and effort has been put into that. And so it should be a lot more clear going forward. Go to the next slide, please. So, just taking a sip of water. All of the suggestions on this page here are general things that we hear about very frequently in our office. So we know that we don't want a high frequency of uses close to one another. The thing that we hear about the most in our office are stores like Jolly General and Family Dollar. We don't want to have those stores so close to one another. So a lot of thought has been put into having like uses spaced out properly in the community and to not have them bunched in certain areas. It is certainly important that there be a big variety of businesses to serve all different types of needs and all different types of communities in the city of South Fulton. We wanted to make sure that those non-residential uses were clearly stated what can go where and what can't go where. It's very easy. I won't say easy, but it's something that we frequently see businesses saying, well, I'm really only doing A, B, and C. Can we go there and go in this area? Or I'm really only doing these two things, when you know that that the business is not being upfront with you when they're applying for development permits or business licenses. So we really wanted to have some clarity put into that process. And we'll talk a little bit later about the enhancements that have been made to development standards in residential areas. We want to make sure that the development that we have coming into the city in the future is sustainable, it's high quality, it's representative of the type of communities that we want to have, and it's beneficial to our existing residents. Next slide, please. So this was the point I was making earlier, talking about different commercial uses. So it's important that those uses that are in C1 be ones that are not so intensive that you wouldn't want to be living in close proximity to those uses. And even though the uses that might go into C2 are very important, we put a lot of thought and effort into making sure that those commercial areas were differentiated from one another in a notable and significant way. We want to make sure that the uses that we list in our commercial areas are representative of the goals sorry, I'm tongue tied, but the goals that we have in our own economic development plan, and we talked about that earlier, being with the council for adoption. So we wanted to make sure that we were thinking long-term in terms of how our zoning codes can ensure that we get the type of development that we want, and that the development that we want is in the places that best suits the lives of our residents. Next slide, please. This is a very egregious example on this industrial slide, industrial uses slide, but I think it makes a really important point. Having a solid industrial base is unquestionably important for our city. Those are uses that provide jobs and pay a lot of taxes to the city, which is very important. And given that we have a lot of areas in the city that are very industrial, it's important that we regulate those appropriately. We do know that some of those industrial uses are not conducive to a clean environment and not conducive to the type of lifestyle we want to have in some of our residential areas. In a lot of ways, the city of South Fulton has to deal with decisions on use placement that were made decades ago. And so bit by bit and day by day, we put policies into place to change this process, this mindset going forward. And the example here is industrial flex space, light warehousing versus an incinerator. Now, when we get to our banned use table and our environmentally adverse uses, you'll see that incineration has been banned in the city of South Fulton, which is a very good thing. But we want to appropriately regulate the types of industrial uses that we know we need versus the types of industrial uses that we certainly do not want to have. And that is the point of the thought process that went into the listing of our industrial uses and the banning of other uses as well. Go to the next slide, please. We're going to go through these use tables bit by bit, and I believe it's going to be the next thing that we do. We've gotten a lot of good feedback going through these. If there's any specific points and really interesting occurrences in these tables to mention, we'll go through it at that time when we get to them. But it's important that everyone see where certain things are allowed in the city and what uses we have decided to keep in certain places and remove from certain places. And so I believe, Marissa, now is the time when we can pull up the allowed use table. And Dana, would you let me know if there any questions or comments that have come in so far?
Yes, I just clicked in.
Oh, perfect.
Councilwoman Catherine Rawl says, I appreciate seeing the comments from the public highlighted in yellow so they can clearly see that their feedback was heard and incorporated where appropriate.
Absolutely.
That's the only one right now.
I want to state also, not only if you go to the zoning code all throughout it, you'll see there is blue text, and that is new text that has been inserted. You'll see that there are highlighted sections which are changes and areas that are crossed off with a red strike through that have been removed, and that's all throughout the zoning code. I also want to state that any comments we receive now are taken into consideration and read over by staff and gone over by our consultants. So if you're just commenting in YouTube and you know whatever you want to say, we take that seriously and we make note of that. So let's talk. I'm sorry, Dana, is there any more questions or comments that have come in?
That's it right now.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about how these tables are used, because I have a vision that these tables are going to be printed off and kind of made into quick user guides for a lot of people because they're just that usable and that useful. So across the top of the chart, you'll see that the different zoning districts are listed. On the right-hand side of the chart, there's a column for restrictions. All of the uses in our zoning are in Article 2. So if you go to Article 2 and just go to the last 23 pages, you'll see these charts. So if you need to know where they are quickly, that's where they are. When you go to Article 3, there are restrictions on these allowed uses. They could be buffering, they could be operational specific things. But there's a whole section in our code devoted to restrictions on those. And the relevant sections of those are listed on the right-hand side of this chart. In this chart, the letter A means allowed. The letter S means special use, which requires a permit. And if there is no marking at all on the cell, that means it is not allowed. So as we go through, you can see the different, could you scroll back up for 1 second, please? I just want to make one note. So you'll see here how on this chart, boarding houses and rooming houses have been stricken from the table. And so as you go through the code, if you see any comments like that or uses like that in this specific table, they've been removed. Some of the things I want to point out on this table here, we get a lot of questions about assisted living homes, about personal care homes, group homes, things like that. You'll see those are allowed in certain residential areas by special use only. So you can apply for those, but there is a lot of other qualifications that you have to go through to get those kind of uses. And we can start scrolling, and if any comments come in as we scroll through these, please let me know. If there's any use that anyone watching has a specific question on, please ask, and we'll either know right now or we'll get back to you. And I have had to reach back out to a few people watching, which is certainly fine. All of these charts here you see are the residential use charts, so you're not going to see any big commercial uses listed here. Let's just pause here real quickly. So you won't see any commercial uses listed in the residential area, only accessory uses to residential activities, which we'll get to in just a second, or non-residential uses such as green space and churches, things like that. We can go to the next page. I just want to make one comment here about the first use on this table, and we can just pause the chart for 1 second, please. Telecommunication support structures, that's basically cell towers and radio towers. And the comment that I want to make here is the same one that I've made the first 2 nights, and I'll make it Wednesday as well. Cell towers are allowed by special use in residential areas, but I want to stress that cell towers at this point in technology are typically put on existing utility poles or are much smaller than what we would have expected to see years and years ago. A lot of times also when big towers go in, they are put in groves of trees and they are painted to look like trees, and they will have fake branches and fake leaves on them. I know you've seen pictures of these. So please don't think that there's a chance of big radio towers showing up in your neighborhood, because special care has been taken to deal with that. And it's just simply not the type of technology that really exists anymore. All of these other uses on this table here are for accessory and temporary uses. The point that I want to make here that kind of always jumps out at me are guest houses. These would not be apartments for rent, but they would be things like mother-in-law suites and detached bedrooms. They are allowed to have plumbing and kitchens and things like that, but not for rent as an apartment. We also get a lot of questions here about home occupations, and those are allowed as well. And these are all allowed by right, which I think is very good policy to have. But as you can see, there are restrictions on those uses in the following chapter. And if you ever have any questions on those, you can always just email or call city staff too. I will make a note here about short-term rentals, which are Airbnbs. Those are allowed, but there is a big stack of regulations on those as well. I get questions on those at least 1 a week. So again, a lot of these things, if you are needing a business license for your home business or for your accessory use, please feel free to just call us in the office or send us an email. And I knew there was a question popping up. I can just feel it. So what do we have, Dana?
Hold on, Moo. Let me see. Nope, nothing. Sorry.
None? Okay, no problem. I'm sure we'll get some either later in the presentation or overnight, because those have been very popular ones to ask questions about. So we can just start scrolling through this table. And if there's any questions from anyone watching about any of the particular uses that you see, please just let us know. If you have any questions on a use that you don't see, please let us know that as well. All right, we can pause here real quick for me. So the tables that we just saw were all the residential tables. So now we're going to see the commercial and industrial tables. And I'm going to make the same comment I've made the same past 2 nights. And I think we figured it out though. But I can understand what C1 and C2 stand for, and OI is office industrial. Then we have a mixed use, but I never understood how industrial was M1 and M2. But I think we cracked the code that M1 and M2 was manufacturing instead of industrial. But M1 and M2 are the industrial zones of the city. So we can start scrolling through these and look through all of the specific commercial industrial uses that are either allowed, require a special use permit, or are expressly disallowed.
I do have another comment.
Sure.
All right, Councilman Catherine Rowell says short-term rental, comma, can explore limiting in some of these zoning districts.
Absolutely. And that's a point, we'll take that up. As I said, we send a list of comments to our consultants at the end of each one of these. So we'll make a point to note that comment and send it in. And Councilmember, if you have any other specific thoughts on that or any policy ideas, again, please let us know, and we'll definitely reach out to you to get any clarification or further elaboration. A lot of the times in these charts, and for a lot of the uses, you'll see that the more environmentally adverse ones are not here anymore. You'll also see that each of the uses is not grouped alphabetically, but grouped by its general type. So if you're searching for a certain type of retail establishment or a certain type of business, it'll be grouped into larger categories by that type.
Still have you, Nathan? Looks like we lost Lathan.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. For anyone watching this now, I don't know what you heard, not heard. Anyone watching this now, take some time and look at the differences between the C1 and C2 areas. Want to make sure that there's a lot of clarity in those two areas as to what uses are where. And if you think that one use should be in a certain place, please let us know. If you think that use should not be in a certain place, please let us know. I will add also that these tables are new to us, but are something that have been gone over by a fine-tooth comb at this point. Something that we put a lot of thought into and something that we're really looking forward to have as a tool for us on a daily basis. That will certainly make our work much easier and hopefully make the application process for development and for business licenses a lot more clear for our customers.
All right, Nathan, I have a question.
Sure.
Councilwoman Catherine Rao, would a brew pub be the same as a distillery? If so, we may need to add to M1.
That's a good question. I think a lot of that would depend on if it was associated with a restaurant or not, but we can make a point to look and see how those uses are broken down. And that's a good example of a use kind of potentially bordering or straddling the line between two different uses. Because we certainly know that distilleries and breweries are extremely popular right now. So we want to make sure that we are allowing those in the right place and they are considered properly. So we can make a note there also. So actually, look, we're right here, just great timing. So breweries and distilleries with or without tasting rooms and tours are in C2. It could be worth it to consider if those kind of places are allowed when they're attached to a restaurant or another type of way broken down like that also. I think in terms of having a brewery distillery in an industrial place, it would probably not be associated with a restaurant, but could be a larger facility. So that's a really good question to ask, and just really good timing in terms of when the question came up as to when we were going through this chart. And you can see a lot of the industrial uses we're getting towards. So all of these are going to be your more industrial uses, more intense uses. Let's make a point to highlight this one here because a lot of things that were stricken. So these are the kind of uses that we got negative questions about, negative comments about, and so they've been stricken entirely and moved to the environmentally adverse use, which is the banned use table, which we will see once we're through with this one. And so this is a really good example of us taking the initiative to move these and to hopefully stop them from spreading throughout the city. Keep scrolling.
Go back to brewery, Nathan.
Yeah.
Councilman Catherine Rowell says, okay, I see it also allowed in M1.
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, I won't be able to land my airplane in a lot of places, but that's okay. Also note too that a lot of uses were made into special use permits instead of just allowed outright, which I think is important. Keep scrolling. Okay, well, let's pause right here. I just want to say that this is the accessory use. So these are going to be things, you know, I don't want to state the obvious nature of an accessory use, but things associated with businesses that would not necessarily be a use in and of themselves. So you can see a good example here is a car wash to a gas station would be allowed in those areas. So we can just start scrolling through these. Your temporary uses here would require a permit. You couldn't just have an outdoor festival without contacting the city, but it is important for people to know that they are available to be conducted. And same here. And I know we're close to the end now. I think I see this table in my sleep. I'll switch over to the ban use table. I think this is really important because it's something that we have not had before. And again, these are things that we get questions on quite frequently. Marissa, if you would do me a favor and just zoom out a little bit. So it's just a little bit smaller, I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. So again, these uses that you're going to see here are the ones that are environmentally adverse. They're intensive. A lot of them are manufacturing or involve chemicals, a lot of dust generation, things like that. So they're things that are very unappealing. And the way that these were dealt with before is that they were banned by distance. You couldn't have them within a certain space of other uses, but we've just decided to ban them outright, which is a fine policy as far as I'm concerned, because these are not things that you would necessarily want to have. A lot of chemical things. There's composting. I'm asked about composting. I don't know, Dana and Marissa, if you guys get questions about that, but I'm asked about composting pretty regularly. But as you can see, they are disallowed.
I do have a comment, Nate.
Sure.
Councilwoman Catherine Rowell, small cell infrastructure need to limit the districts it can be allowed.
We can make note of that, and we'll bring that up with our consultants as well. There's our favorite, incineration has been banned. We did get some questions last week about metal fabrication and in terms of needing to do some repair to a steel building or shed that you had. This was a gentleman who did some farming work, needed to know about metal fabrication. Anything you need to do at your home, accessory to the uses of your home, if you needed to make a part to fix your car in your garage, or cut a piece of sheet metal to put up as siding, or to do any kind of light auto repair of your own personal vehicles. Those are always allowed at your home to do. You obviously, I want to make clear, auto repair as a business is not allowed at your home. But if you need to do any creation of parts to fix your own personal automobile or machines that you have at home, you are certainly allowed to do that. No, we're getting to the end of this table here, but I know it's a little bit. I don't want to say it's tedious for us to watch the screen as these scroll by, but like I said, we get questions about these a lot. I know that people are very passionate about certain uses, and given that they are new to the staff and new to the whole city, I think this is really valuable for us to kind of scroll through these and get comments on them. All right, well, that's the end of the banned use table. Any other comments that have come in on those right now? Okay, I'll assume not.
No.
Okay, again, if anyone has any comments about those, feel free to share them at any time. So we can go back. All right, we've seen this slide. We can go to the next one. Let's talk a little bit about zoning districts. So 2 points I'd like to make here. I didn't put this map on here to be necessarily readable, because I know that the city is very large and we have a lot of zoning districts. What I want to make, the first point I want to make is, one of the major intents was to streamline our zoning areas. So we have a lot of zoning, we have traditionally had a lot of zoning districts in the city of South Fulton. And a lot of effort was made to consolidate those, remove any ones that were not used or that were obsolete from our map. And there is a section in our new zoning for obsolete and non-active zoning districts. So there could be a property that is zoned something, but it's not one that we are carrying forward. So it's not going to be rezoned, but it's not going to be an option for uses going into the future. And as far as this map is concerned, one of the things that we want to do in this process is bring clarity to our map and make sure it's easy to read. Hopefully in the development of this ordinance will result in the creation of a new map as well. One of the things I want to point out on this map is the preponderance of different colors. So you'll see that, and I know this only because I've seen this map so many times at this point, but the top we have industrial, and the middle is commercial, and then the bottom, all those different colors are residential. So typically what you'll want to see is variations on one color for uses, so it's very clear what use is where and what use is represented. So you can see on this map how residential is represented by yellows and browns and blues and greens. So typically you'll want to see like a gradient of uses in one area. You'll want to see, and for the purpose of illustration, if all your commercial uses and all your commercial zoning was blue, for less intense commercial areas, you could have lighter blues. And for more intensive commercial areas, you could have darker blues. And so you could see throughout the map easily which areas were commercial. You could see which areas were light commercial, heavy commercial. You could see the relation of those areas to residential districts and industrial districts. And what you would typically want to see is, in a general sense, lighter colored residential areas near light colored residential. You'd want to see lighter colored commercials near all the colored residential areas, and you'd want to see darker colored commercial areas near lighter industrial areas, and you would not want to see any color industrial areas next to residential areas. Now, obviously, in practice, things happen over the course of time. And like I said earlier, in a lot of ways, the city of South Fulton is having to, we used to make this comment all the time where I used to work, but correct the sins of the past, right? So before the proper thought and process were put into place by the creation of the city, we were subject to whatever Fulton County governance wanted to do in our areas. And there wasn't necessarily the right amount of consideration placed as to what was allowed where. Well, that is stopped. And so what we're doing now is making sure that going forward, we're doing things in a proper and logical and thoughtful way. And so the intent of this process and of the zoning ordinance and of this map is to have those carry forward into the future. And the map is to visualize the zoning. And hopefully, over the course of time, you will see the zoning of certain areas. And this is the time frame I'm talking about here is not, it's unfortunately not 6 months. It's 6 months, it's a year, it's 5 years, it's 10 years, it's 20 years. So over the course of time, you want to see those zoning changes reflective on the map. And that means that you're developing the way you know is best for your community. You can go to the next slide, please.
I have one comment.
Sure.
Councilwoman Catherine Rao, good idea for color coding.
Thank you very much. I think I'm really happy you agree with that. And I think that it makes the map easier to use. And that's really important because in planning and zoning, we're one of the most outward facing departments. We deal with customers every day and we're not in the office now, so we can't deal with them in that way, but emails, phone calls, people coming in. We don't really get faxes anymore either. That just shows how long I've been doing this kind of stuff. But you want to make sure that your documents are user friendly because there's so many people who are interacting with those all the time. And I think one of the great outputs of the process that we're doing right now is having a department that is better in terms of being customer friendly and having those documents and processes in place to be that way. And hopefully, we see that already just based on the knowledge that we've gained from going through this process. But I think the hard documents that we're going to have are going to make a real positive difference. And so that's something that is very pleasing and is just very, very positive for our department and for everyone who interacts with us as well. Let's talk a little bit about the overlays because I know that there are a lot of passions involved in these overlay districts. I know a lot of thought went into developing these overlay districts, and I know that people take them very, very seriously. I will say, I've only been with the city a short time, but I know that these districts have not been with the city a short time, and they have not been with the county for a short time. So it definitely has been time to go over those with a fine-tooth comb and make some revisions that could modernize them in a little way. I want to make clear that overall, the content and intent of these districts did not change at all. And they really were just reorganized, again, ease of use and quickness of use. So to the second point here, maintain the development standards with modifications to facilitate the quality of development. This is one example, but it's a really tangible example, one's easy to understand. So in the new zoning code, in the overlay districts, you will see pages that have actual color swatches for all of the allowable colors, as opposed to just listing the color numbers in the Pantone charts. And if you know about those, it's Pantone charts are thousands of different shades of colors, but they all have a number associated with them. So now you'll see actual color palettes that are allowed in the charts, which is again, just an example of making the document easier to use and making the overlay districts a little bit more modern. Go to the next slide, please. One thing that I'll make note of here, and again, a little later on, because it's again, an easy update to understand, our lighting standards. So we wanted to incorporate LED bulbs as opposed to the incandescent bulbs that were previously called for. We have aspects of these overlays that are obviously specific to each one of them. We also want to make sure that all the citywide development standards we have, we're not in conflict with those development standards in overlay districts. And I'll make up an example just for point of illustration. But if an overlay required, a certain maximum height, and the city required a maximum height, you want to make sure that obviously in that example, the overlay would rule the day. But where there are instances where there are conflicting regulations, you want to make sure that is soothed over, right? We also want to make sure that the point is made that there could be a chance to update these further in the forthcoming comprehensive plan process. We know that there is not just a desire to make sure these overlays are modern and reflective of the desires of the current residents, but also there are areas in the city that do not have overlays, or there may be areas of the city that could have their boundaries adjusted, because we know things change over time. All planning and zoning is living and breathing and is subject to be changed really at any time or all the time. And I think that's a really good thing. But there will be a chance to go over these and expand or adjust them in our upcoming comprehensive planning. And I will make note here that if any resident or developer or builder listening has any thoughts on comprehensive planning, make sure to stay tuned because there'll be opportunities for that coming forward. Or please send in your comments and thoughts now, because I'll keep them filed away. I'll know that they came in. So this is not the first or last opportunity to have input into what the design guidelines are for the city. I think that's the point that needs to be made here. Go to the next slide. So overall, the standards that were addressed in our updated zoning here: lighting, exterior cladding, that's the siding on your buildings, reflectivity of windows, buffers, setbacks, we deal with those all the time, and signs. I'll make a point to say that signs are a specific chapter now in our zoning code, and I definitely envision a lot of sign companies and or builders just keeping a copy of that sign section in their file for easy reference. And that's another big plus for us. I'm going to pause really quickly. I'm going to see if there's any other comments that have come in.
No.
Okay, go to the next slide. So one of the things we've done here, as I said, updated lighting standard to include LED. That's what everyone has in their homes now. And I don't even know if a lot of places don't even have incandescent bulbs for sale anymore. We also want to make sure that the proper amount of lighting is specified in certain areas. And one of the things that I will mention now that I've mentioned the other nights as well, to the third point here, comparing the citywide night sky and lighting standards for overlays, we want to make sure that areas both properly direct their lights in terms of where they are shining and have the correct intensity. We all have driven by places in the evening that are too bright, and we know they're too bright, and there are regulations in place to stop them from happening. Also, I want to make clear, and as a side note, if anyone's residential area, if your home is impacted by commercial or industrial lighting that is too bright, please let us know. I can't say with 100% certainty there's something that we can do, but there are regulations in place for light pollution. So please let us know. We can try to help you out as much as we can. But light pollution is real, and it's something that was taken into consideration when developing these ordinances. And I just want to make that point. So we can go to the next slide, please. This slide generally, and I think we'll deal with it in a later slide, but the point here is that it's important for us to foster quality development. The easiest example I can give is vinyl siding. Vinyl siding can be done well. It cannot be done well. It can be maintained properly. It cannot be maintained properly. It's not a material that you see in regulations or not. It's not a material you see in a lot of brand new home construction anymore because there are different materials available that are both longer lasting and easier to maintain. And so the point being made here is that we want to encourage and require developers to use materials that will be easy to maintain, that are higher quality, and that will improve the overall aesthetics and quality of a neighborhood. If the materials going into new construction improve the quality of that construction, then those buildings improve the quality of life for all the people living there, all the people working there. The buildings last longer, they're easier to maintain, and they look better. And so thought went into making sure that and as a sidebar, it keeps property values up, which I know everybody's interested in. So thought went into making sure that new development coming in was not just there in quantity, because we do want new development. We want to encourage people to come to South Fulton for a lot of reasons, but we want to make sure that the growth we have is quality, and the zoning is where you regulate those materials to make sure we have the quality materials. Next slide, please. We are asked questions about buffers every day, and I'm getting to the 1 hour mark of me talking, which is usually always where I end up. So we're asked questions about buffers and setbacks every day, and I want to make sure that it's clear to everyone listening that those comments do not go by the wayside. We want to make sure that people are properly protected, is a heavy word, but we're going to go ahead and use it, protected from the impacts of commercial and residential development, or commercial and industrial development rather, that is near to their homes. Even though we cannot necessarily affect what is happening around us in adjacent municipalities, we can take that into consideration. So the first point here is increasing buffers between residential development and adjacent jurisdictions. We know a lot of times there can be a warehouse right on the jurisdictional boundary line. That doesn't mean that a new subdivision has to butt up right against it. That means adequate spacing can be there to allow for the residents in a new subdivision or new housing development to have less of an impact by other municipalities' carelessness, shall we say. That's the second point there too. So in an overall sense, we wanted to make sure that the buffering requirements are there for those developments within the city as well, both from a commercial side and residential side. So everyone is being taken into consideration at every step of the process, whether it be a residential development, whether it be a commercial development. And that's the overall point that needs to be made. The next slide, please. We are also asked questions about setbacks and staggering all the time. That's probably our number one question and issue we have when it comes to new subdivisions. So want to make sure that those are not just handled through zoning conditions as they had been, but we want to make sure that those are now required. So I don't know if the council member is still listening, but hopefully the days of those kind of things having to be a specific mention or thought by someone are over, because they are now part and standard to every requirement or every development by ordinance, which is a really good thing. Again, we want to enhance design standards, encourage quality materials. The first time I gave this presentation, we were stumped as to the movies we were thinking of, but the movies to think of are Edward Scissorhands and The Truman Show. And you see those movies and they go into those comical subdivisions where every house looks exactly the same. And that's exactly what we don't want to do. So we're making sure that those kind of situations can happen. We also, and talking about townhouses, again, the internal setback requirements to allow them to be proper spaced and not packed in so tight. Go to the next slide, please.
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
Councilwoman Catherine Rao, can we do a MOU with neighboring city to address buffers, lighting, etc.?
I don't see why not, but that might be a question for you to ask the city attorney, honestly, or the city manager. But there is certainly nothing stopping you from having those type of agreements and discussions with neighboring municipalities. And, you know, in my opinion, I don't think that would be unwelcome from either side, because certainly the other municipalities don't want to be negatively impacted by development in the city of South Fulton as well. So those are definitely, I think those are probably worthwhile topics for you to have. It's probably a little bit above my personal pay grade and a little bit higher up the totem pole than me, but that is exactly the way that you and me and developers and residents should be thinking. You know, what are new things that we can do? What are things that we can try? How can we cooperate? How can we coordinate? All of those things are incredibly helpful. And, you know, we're doing this stuff not for ourselves, but for people in 1 year, in 5 year, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years. And so the decisions that we're making now, we've seen how decisions that were made by Fulton County decades ago affect us. And so let's make sure that we're making those type of decisions that are positively impacting people that are going to be here in the future. And that's something that I think is really, really important to take into consideration. So we've reached the end of our presentation. I'm right at the 1 hour mark, so I'm right on schedule as I've been the past few weeks. We will be completed with all of the public input and all of the taking of comments and analyzation by the end of this week. We're going to get the last comments on Wednesday night and the last survey responses on Thursday morning. We're going to take all those, give them to the consultant. We'll probably have a meeting with them at the end of this week or the beginning of next week to go over all of those comments and get them incorporated. We will also be hopefully then getting a final draft within the next week and a half. That'll go to council for any further comment and refinement. And the intent is for this process to be wrapped up by the end of October and to have all these new guidelines fully implemented. And I have to tell you personally, I am very much looking forward to that day. I know I can't speak for my staff who's on the call, but I have a feeling that they would agree with me on that one.
Sure, yeah.
So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the entire internet for watching. We really, really appreciate it. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate you sending in comments. We appreciate you being members of the community. I'm going to be giving this talk, this presentation one more time on Wednesday night. Again, if you have any questions or comments at all, please send them into the email address at the bottom of your screen. And please take that survey for us. Thank you all very much. And I hope you have an awesome evening and rest of your week.
Thank you.